And we're back for another Gab with Abigail. If you aren't back and this is your first time on my channel, hi, welcome to Gabs with Abigail, where we talk about the Bates and Duggars and other D-list fundies. It's been a minute, so if you're back, I really appreciate you because I have not posted in a while. Where have I been?
That's not a secret I'll never tell. You know you love me.
No, I'm kidding. I will share or talk about a little bit about like why I haven't been posting for a while, and like maybe another video. I don't say maybe, I will. Probably I'll save that for the Rodriguez video. So, because we gotta catch up with them. So much has gone on. It's in the Rodriguez family, like 3 months is basically like 10 years. There's so much going on all the time. I love it. Thank you. God knows I have to have my own life. If it was not for them, I'm fulfilled. For today's video, we are finally talking about Ginger's book. Her book actually came out on my birthday, which I thought was like really ironic. Yeah, but it's Becoming Free Indeed, My Story of Disentangling Faith from Fear, Jinger, Duggar, Vuolo. So what is this book about? Let's hear in Ginger's own words what this book is about.
So Becoming Free Indeed is the story of my faith journey. I grew up under some harmful teaching that threatened to leave me fearful and confused about who Jesus is.
Just like fearful,
and
confused about
this is the story of how I've had to disentangle faith from fear,
truth from error, on my way to finding freedom in Christ.
I'm going to break up my review or my thoughts into like 3 major topics. Yeah, and then I'm probably just going to be just talking off the cuff, whatever, sharing my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions about this wonderful book that Ginger wrote for us. First thing I want to talk about in this book is it not being a tell-all. And people being disappointed with that. I thought it was weird that people were so disappointed because just out the gate, she made it clear that this book was not going to be about her family, was not going to be a tell-all. And people made it seem like there weren't like juicy things about it in her book about her family. And I disagree. See, while this wasn't a tell-all, while she didn't, it wasn't a tell-all about her family, the way it felt was like, this isn't a tell-all, but it is a subtweet. You know what I mean? I didn't at anybody, but one of my followers, that's what this book felt like. Page 35. I admire those who strongly desire to have a lot of children, but these days I just can't say I feel the same way. Of course I adore my 2 precious daughters. Being their mom is one of the greatest joys of my life. I love my children with my whole heart and soul, but my current perspective on parenthood and what that looks like for me is very different from the perspective of the culture in which I was raised. I grew up assuming that a woman starts having children as soon as she is married and continues until she physically can't have any more. Even if she has severe health issues or feels overwhelmed by the number of children she already has, she cannot stop having children. This belief was largely due to Gothard's teachings. His basic care booklet says this about pregnancy and children. What if another pregnancy will cause health problems? What should a woman do if her doctor tells her that another pregnancy will create serious or even life-threatening complications? What should a man do if he is warned if you get your wife pregnant, you will be responsible for her death? In answering these questions, the following factors must be carefully evaluated. 1, God has ultimate control. If God wants to give a child to a couple, he is also able to give the level of health in the mother and the child that will bring the greatest glory to him. 2, no decision should be based on fear. God has not given us a spirit of fear. Therefore, fear is from Satan and not God. Gothard also said Christian families should ignore potentially life-saving medical advice because, quote, all births require sacrifice on the part of the parents, quote, and, quote, many predictions do not come true. He taught that God's will was for a woman to have children no matter what, even if her life was in danger. And I just feel like that's not a little bit about your family, babe. That's not about your mother. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I mean, the main premise of this book is about how she no longer believes in Gothard's teachings and that she's rejecting Gothard's teachings. And so in particular, that is probably the thing that the Duggars are the most famous for, is the Quiverful movement, right? The show was called, not for nothing, 19 Kids and Counting. So it's like, how was this not supposed to be kind of like, it's not a tell-all, but it's not about my family, but it's about it's about your family, babe. Like, this is what you watched and lived day in and day out. This part about, deciding that she doesn't need to have a bunch of kids. Even that is really a revelation of itself. Her saying, like, I was never really a children's person. And honestly, rethinking about Jinger on the show, and honestly, I've always kind of felt this way, that of the elder sisters, Jinger was probably the least motherly to her siblings. And ranking them would probably be like, Jill, Jana, Jessa, then Jinger, in terms of being like a motherly, like sister mom type. She really wasn't. I mean, when we think about who in the family volunteered to babysat a lot, you don't think of Jinger. When we think about the buddy teams, like, I don't even know who was on Ginger's buddy team. Like, Jinger wasn't ever a motherly type sister. She really wasn't. But I think that's so interesting to reflect upon in her book and think back like, yeah, you're right. I don't think any of us would have ever saw Jinger as being the type to have a bunch of kids, which I think why it's so ironic how she treats or talks about the Free Jinger movement, which is what inspired, in part inspired the title of this book. And she talks about the blog and how, basically because she said that she wanted to be in a big city, that's how the Free Jinger movement got started. I'll circle back around to that in a little bit. But thinking about that and how just like that's how you came off on the television show, and just because you believed that in your heart you'd have all those kids, I think it's so funny and it's so ironic to act like we weren't right about you. Page 49. This book is not a tell-all about her family. It's just a subtweet, okay? According to Gothard, if someone's grandfather was an alcoholic, it would take 5 generations of no liquor at all just to remove the proneness to alcoholism that passed on to the children. That same principle applied to any sin: anger, laziness, lying, or lust. If my great-great-grandfather struggled with anger, Gothard said, it would be passed to me. To break this family curse, to reverse the way my family was designed, I had to set up special disciplines and limits. I needed to create barriers to committing those sins or be exposed to them in any way. Which, in all honesty, yes, actually, if you had an alcoholic grandparent or parent, you should be careful around alcohol. Research would show that, yes, that is actually genetic and you should be careful. That isn't incorrect. There is nothing wrong with living an extremely chaste life. I understand not wanting someone. I don't know. I think alcohol is a thing where it's really not at all something that you need to drink. There really is no reason in this, especially in this day and age. We're not going to talk about in the back in the day, but especially now, there are so many options of things that you can drink that there really isn't a reason to need to drink alcohol, right? For it to be that big of a deal, if you're really scared to ever drink or to ever put yourself at risk of drinking, there's really no reason, because there's really no reason to. There's absolutely no health benefit. It's so much better for you to not drink at all. I have my own stories with like, oh, I don't want to drink. I went to happy hour with my coworkers once, the first time we ever went out, and I got blackout drunk, threw up, don't remember half the evening. They were really nice about it. But and obviously that's a story of taking it to an excess, but the reality is you don't need to drink alcohol for this to like be a bad thing. And again, if you do have alcohol in your family, yeah, you probably should take more precautions than most people when it comes to drinking, because you never know. You might be the person who, yes, picks up the gene till you can't stop. There's nothing wrong with that, as a warning, in my opinion. But why I say this is a subtweet is because it's been rumored for the longest that Grandpa Duggar was an alcoholic, and I feel like, who was this about? This was oddly specific, babe. If your parent is prone to anger, Dad, I think you're getting kind of angry. That's not funny, because I can only imagine the kind of destruction that kind of like, that inspired the behaviors that inspired that story within, like, if you know, I'm sorry, if you're deep in the funny Kool-Aid, you know what story that I'm talking about, and I'll try and put in a little like for you to read, because Jim Bob and Michelle have told this story like 18 million times. When I say and Michelle, I really mean just Jim Bob, because from this patriarchal cult, that's who gets angry, is the dad. Women aren't allowed to have that emotion, right? So this isn't a tell-all, it's just a subtweet, okay? I don't remember, this is page 89. I don't remember exactly how many guys asked my dad if they could court me. I know it was at least 20. It could have been as many as 26. I'll never forget the week that 5 young men approached my dad asking to start a relationship with me. I don't share that number to brag. Ooh. Tight pussy gal, calm down yourself. Like, okay, girl. Okay. I don't say that just because, like, I was out here being chose. But it doesn't say much about my personality, character, or looks, because most of the guys didn't know me. Some had seen me at a conference my family attended. I hadn't shared more than a passing hello with any of them. I'm guessing a few confused me with one of my sisters. Several had seen the show and decided they wanted to court a Duggar girl. A similar number of guys were interested in each of my sisters. Thankfully, my dad always asked me and my sisters what we thought. If we didn't want to court a guy, our dad would go back and let him know there was no interest. I'm not going to lie, it was kind of nice to tell my dad, thanks but no thanks, and not have to tell the suitors themselves. And you know what I love about this story? Again, where this is like, it's not a tell-all, but it's a subtweet. Just there's this idea that in courtship, in funny courtship, that, or for the Duggars, I'll say that Jim Bob picks their husbands, that it's an arranged marriage type of situation, and so this is, reconfirming, no, guys, he let us choose. Like, no, my parents are the best Christian parents. They just had all this crazy Gothard stuff going on that impacted me, but it wasn't them. They love Jesus. They're good people. He let me choose my husband. All right, page 127. Again, this isn't a tell-all. Imagine this scenario. A man and a woman get married. They immediately start having children because Gothard opposes any kind of birth control. Financially, they are not in a position to own a home because they're not allowed to go into debt. This means no mortgage. So they live in what they can afford, a tiny 2-bedroom house that they rent. At first, that's okay because they have only one child, but then more children come. Next thing they know, they're 6 years into marriage with 5 children under 5 years old. To provide food and clothing for his family, the husband works longer hours, taking on more responsibility or even more jobs. This takes the dad out of the home for 10 or 12 hours a day. Since they're not allowed to send their kids to school, the mom is in her home with morning sickness from pregnancy for half the year, trying to manage and homeschool 5 kids. She feels overwhelmed, unable to handle the responsibility of raising so many children practically alone. Then the husband comes home, and the house feels like chaos, but the wife has to have it all together to keep her husband faithful and satisfied. That's what Bill Gothard taught her. The house must be clean, she must be happy with no expectations, and the children must be well behaved. The problem is she's struggling to maintain her mental health and physical appearance, which is terrifying because it means her husband may start desiring other women. The guilt begins to build. On top of that, she is told she must be joyfully available to meet her husband's physical needs. More sex likely means more children, but they are told over and over to just trust God. Sadly, this is not a hypothetical scenario. It's a difficult situation many people have experienced after buying into Gothard's principles. Gothard, by the way, never married and never had children. How did he become the leading authority for so many issues he himself never understood? It's not about your mama. This isn't about your mom. That's not your mom you just described. That wasn't the first 10 years of her life until you guys, you older girls, were able to be big enough to help her raise the other kids. That's not you? That's not your family? Okay. It's not a tell-all, it's just a subtweet. And I think I understand, a tell-all would be, well, here's a specific story where I saw my mom struggling and my dad didn't help. But sweetheart, we know. We know. I think it's so funny. So I don't know why people, feel like they weren't satisfied with this. Because I guess, because it's not an adding. It's not well, there was this day when I was 12 when I saw my dad come home and just not do a damn thing to help my mother out around the house. Or I could remember when the 9 of us were living in a 3-bedroom house in, Little Rock or something like that, We know this third person voyeurism, as if this isn't something that your family experienced while going through this Gothard fundamentalist system, is so interesting. Why that kind of language is almost annoying, where it's like, girl, this was you. This was your family. This was their truth. Whether they might not, reflect on it in that way. And, she's a conservative, so, you can't talk about people like that, or else they're going to say, you're victimizing them. You're in a victimhood mentality. Still getting comments on that Mrs. Midwest video. I don't know for what. But I just think it's so interesting that it's like, girl, this was your family. Let's not be cute about it. There are so many times when Jinger emphasizes that she had a happy childhood. Her parents were so good to her, blah, blah, blah. That yes, indeed, in terms of this whole aspect of what this lifestyle was, you were a child of divine privilege. And, Jeremy talks about it in their Q&A that they did on a live, that families like Ginger's were put onto a pedestal, onto stage, and given praises for how successful that they have been by living this lifestyle, to show all the other families out there who are trying to live it too and are struggling, that if you keep trusting the system, you keep trusting God, that this is going to happen for you too. And the reality of it being just more of what this scenario was like. And yeah. So following that thread, right, of this unrealistic scenario that Gothard put onto women and their families and their lifestyle, that Jinger is just giving us a random scenario. It's not a tell-all. On 173. I don't think Gothard's view encouraged a healthy treatment of women. Wives were pressured to smile and be upbeat at all times, no matter what they were feeling inside, and they were told to not have any expectations of their husbands. Here's one example of a time Gothard encouraged a wife to do just that. Here's a woman that has dinner all ready for her husband, 6:30, but no husband. 7 o'clock, still no husband. 7:30, finally 7:45, the husband comes in, and by that time she's hot and the food is cold, and nothing tastes good that night because she said, he should have called me ahead of time if he's going to be late. He knows he's supposed to call me. So nothing tastes good that night. So then let's say the next day that she follows this very important step. That evening, 6:30, no husband. 7:30, still no husband. Finally, 7:45, the husband comes in. And when he comes in, she is thrilled to see him because she wasn't expecting him at all. There's so much you could unpack, but I understand that she's trying to unpack that this is inappropriate. Now, I guarantee that he's going to be aware of her new attitude. In fact, at first he'll wonder what she wants, and then he'll wonder how long it's going to last. And when he sees that attitude lasting, then God will begin to do a work in his life. Again, wives and anyone under authority, that matter of gratefulness is more powerful, more important than you realized. I used to think stories like this were helpful. Now I think they can be dangerous and hurt a lot of women. Such stories can make them think it's their job and theirs alone to keep the marriage together. In this instance, Gothard was telling wives not to communicate their expectations with their husbands. He was telling them to be passive. Simultaneously, he was saying that the husband bore no responsibility to keep his word and be faithful to his family. The husband was given free rein to behave how he wanted and should only be encouraged by his wife. I really believe this led to a culture where men felt a lack of consequences for their actions. Yeah, girls, this is Josh, right? This is Jim Bob, right? I mean, and also I think, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that I do think that Jinger is one of her parents' favorite children. Or maybe I was going to say that in a different video, so. But I do think she, especially her mother, I think she's one of her mother's favorite children. I know the big families like to pretend that they don't have a favorite child. They do. Y'all do. I don't think every family has a favorite child, but I do think it would be hard in a family this big to not have a child who you feel emotionally really closely connected to. Like that child kind of, I don't want to say gets you, but on an emotional level, they do something for you in terms of like comfort. So I can see Jinger as a child who, one again, was born right in the midst of all that craziness. I'm happy that Jinger was an easy baby, a compliant baby, and how like just those kinds of thing, that kind of thing when you are really, really stressed, right? When you're the woman in that scenario of you have all of these little kids who are everywhere pretty much, that you have a child who, when you're trying to teach to obey, just kind of naturally is very obedient, where it kind of feels like that child kind of gets you, you know? And like the little extra affections and tenderness that you can give them. Jinger looks a lot like a mix of both of her parents. She has the big eyes that change colors that are really pretty. I do just have a feeling that like, I don't know, when you are a child who's close with your parent, these are the kinds of things that you are able to reflect upon and see, right? Obviously there isn't all the time when there's no cameras and there's not all of these outside people around, the facade of being happy and excited and joyful and cheerful all the time, right? The wall comes down, the veneer, starts to crack, it slips a little bit. And I think if you are a child who is, just close to your parent, that those might be times that you see. If you are a quieter child as well, if you are maybe the child who's more observant, you might also notice these sort of things and dynamics between your parents, right? Then there's this part in the book where Jinger talks about having friends. And when she talks about in the intro of the book, like her motivations for writing this, part of it was, she said, to undo some of the things that she said in Growing Up Duggar. And I bring that up just because when I was reading Growing Up Duggar, which I still have not finished and will finish at some point, I remember reading part of it and thinking, I think it was the chapter that was like your relationship with your friends, and thinking like, oh, like you guys probably don't have any real friends outside of each other. Like the way you're describing relationships with friends just sounds so like vapid and shallow. Maybe not vapid, but shallow. It doesn't sound like you have deep, meaningful, emotional conversations with your friends about dreams and hopes that you have, like wild, crazy things that you wouldn't tell anybody else.
And within the community of ATI, it almost was a weird bragging right. We're like, oh, I'm a first-year family. We're a second-year family. I'm a third-year family. Yeah, it was just ridiculous.
Does that mean that you got in on your third try, or within the third year that the homeschool curriculum was released?
The latter.
Gotcha. So what difference does it make?
I think it was just that like our family jumped in on it right away. Like, wow, they've been in it from the beginning and there's this grassroots movement kind of feeling. And again, it was just a weird, I think because we were all the majority of homeschooled kids in this curriculum, we were lacking social tools. So when you meet someone, it's not like, oh, hey, I like your hair. Or, yeah, I heard you saying this and I thought it was like really amazing. You didn't have a flow of how to communicate and how to be in a social setting. So it was kind of like, what are all the identifiers? Oh, you're a third year family. You're a firstborn. You're a mercy prophet. I called it a Moffat. You would have your spiritual gift, your birth order, where you live, how long you've been a Christian, just all these like things. And then you're just like, okay, I have all this data. But you're like, personality wise, what do we do with each other? And a lot of the time when you would have these connections, when you go to these seminars and you'd meet other students, it would stop there because you didn't know how to move beyond that conversation, or it would just fall into literally Bible talk or Bill Gothard and what was going on in the ministry.
So anyways, Ginger had this to say, right? Before moving to Texas, I can remember just a handful of times I'd gone one-on-one to coffee or a meal with a person who wasn't part of my family. I did not have many close friends who weren't also siblings. My sister Jessa was my best friend. Beyond her, I was and am still very close with all my sisters. Yeah. Like, I knew that. Because it's kind of very obvious. And also, again, why this to me is, which is really unhealthy. But again, why this is not a tell-all, but a subtweet to her parents, because in Michelle and Jim Bob's book, I think it's the first book that they wrote, where they talk about their reasons for homeschooling. The reason was because, we didn't want to send our kids to school where they would be, make friends, with their classmates. Instead, it would be so much better for them to be best friends with their siblings. And it's like, I remember reading that and thinking, this is stupid. Not stupid, but like, yes, actually, it's really healthy and important to have friends who are your own age and aren't from within your family, because they give you a different life perspective. And in case you need somebody to tell something about is going on, or just have a place to decompress that's outside of your family, that you have that. Like, imagine you're growing up like the black sheep of your family and you aren't allowed to have any friends besides your family. And when I say allowed, right, because you're like, of course we were allowed. You were allowed to make fake, superficial, shallow friendships, right? Who's Jana's best friend right now? It ain't Michaela from back in the cult days, right? It's this new Laura girl who didn't grow up in fundamentalism like this that y'all did, right? I mean, Jess and you are best friends because you're sisters, but the friends and close friends that you have now in relationships are not people from within this group. And the reality is, there are so many people who, now I'm not included because I'm not good at keeping up with relationships. And that's, again, I'm going to save that for when I talk about where I've been. But I really think that, I know a lot of people, in high school who I went to elementary school with. And then we went to middle school with, and then we went to high school with, and we went to college, to all of our different colleges, and to this day are still extremely close, are really good friends. It is bizarre to me that I have I know at least 3 couples from who I went to elementary and middle school and high school who got together and are now married. That is how, I don't want to say close-knit our city is or anything like that I'm from, but just what it means to make those friendships when you're a peer group. It's just such a weird thing that they weren't encouraged to basically, we wanted, as if they couldn't foster really close friendships within their families if they went to school. That's strange. I know plenty of people who would say that their siblings are still their best friends. They're really close friends, the people that they go with their most traumatic struggles probably first before they go to some of their really close friends, but who have really close friends still. It's just so strange. It's I don't want to say strange, but again, why this wasn't an at, but it was a subtweet. Okay, so lastly, I think I just want to say quick comment on Ginger saying, my parents couldn't have afforded to take the entire family across the country several times a year, much less overseas. She's thinking TLC, Grateful for the Show experience. There are dozens of places and cultures I wouldn't know anything about if not for the show, which I just think is interesting from a like reading in between the lines thing of like the fact that you wouldn't have known about them because your parents wouldn't have taught you them in homeschooling is, you know, disappointed but not surprised. Like, and I get it, you know, the wisdom booklets were connecting the Aztecs to the Sermon on the Mount. So I'm girl, we know you wouldn't have gotten any of that culture. It's just, there's so many things. There's so many things. Let's move on to the next topic. Disentangling versus deconstruction. Maybe, hands down, top 10, number 1 reason that this book was so annoying. It was so goddamned annoying at that, okay? I just... woosah. Okay, so sadly at this point of the video, my mic started having issues, and so I'm re-recording this part as a voiceover. Jinger experienced an incredibly privileged version of IBLP and Gothardism, and this book seems to lack the self-awareness of how this privilege has informed her life journey and choices. For example, in the book, Jinger talks about how she never really was a let me hold your baby kind of person. And you can tell by how she talks about this that Jinger never felt like she was playing a mini-mom to her siblings, which is fantastic, but the reality is that there is a generation of quiverful IBLP girls who were forced to forfeit their childhoods to play mother to their siblings.
You know, sibling would arrive, and I was the oldest. A lot of responsibility on my shoulders. The quiverful movement is pretty brutal for the oldest daughters because they're expected to help raise the younger siblings. It's just the way it goes. And so I'd be, you know, in high school trying to teach myself biology. I'd be, you know, just told, okay, these are the chapters you read in this textbook, and I'd be trying to learn it. And then I'd get interruptions. Oh, you have to change, you know, your little brother's diaper. You got to go start lunch for everybody. And that was how I struggled through high school, trying to teach myself and run a household at the same time.
To embrace all the children that God has designed for your family.
Ava and Susanna, when you're done, we can go on upstairs and get you ready for church.
As we watch the Shed's oldest child, Olivia. At 12, she's intent on practicing her future role as a quiverful mother and homemaker, whether she's helping her sisters with their music or with their hair. She appears completely content to mother the little ones and shows not the slightest interest in the usual preteen trappings of boys or MySpace or gossiping on the phone.
Do you ever feel like, wow, I have a lot of responsibility and I'm only 12, and yet here I am making breakfast for the younger ones, and I put them down for a nap, I help brush their teeth, I do their hair. Do you ever feel like this is a lot of responsibility for me and I'm really a child myself?
Not really. I feel like it's a privilege to be helping my mommy. I don't feel like it's a burden or that I'm overworked. My mama is training me and my sisters to be helpmates someday for our husbands.
And they were told to be grateful. Jinger reiterates how she thought following Gothard's principles would lead to a successful life. And really at the shallowest level, for her it did. Her book never grapples with the fact that she did get the husband, she did get the house, she did get the children. She has not in her life ever wondered where the money for food was going to come from. She has the money to stop shopping out of thrift stores and instead is now shopping at pricey boutiques. On page 121, Jinger says this: I began to seriously consider writing this book in the middle of 2021. As I did, I wrestled with fear, wondering what would happen if I publicly criticized Gothard-like teachings. Would I hurt relationships with friends and loved ones? Would people I cared about stop talking to me? Would they say I had abandoned the faith of my childhood, that I was at risk of walking away from the Lord? I worried I wouldn't be invited into homes where I had once been treated like family. No one wants to be criticized by the community that raised them, but conservative, tight-knit religious groups can be particularly harsh to those who decide to leave. But Jinger didn't lose her family as she let go of Gothard's beliefs. I mean, the only family member we haven't seen her with publicly is Joe, who has had 4 babies in the last 5 years. She admits in the book that she had no close friendships outside her family. And it's not like after moving to LA and leaving IBLP, she was coming home to Arkansas wearing a trans rights are human rights tee. Like, let's be fucking for real for a sec. While she might have been scared of losing community, did she really lose any? Jinger speaks about the abuse Gothard's girls experienced as a voyeur, and never as a mutual victim of the sexual abuse IBLP had running through it. Jinger never had to go back to school and experience the inadequacy of major parts of her education in order to make a living.
On his own and provide for us on his own while my mom stayed home. And she had a degree, which is really helpful, and she's a really good writer, and so I feel good about my writing skills that I learned from her. Honestly, like, the biggest problems were actually in math and science, because math, she just had trouble with it herself, and so she didn't really get as much help. And then with science, there's this, like, belittling of education in certain sections of the homeschool group, which is kind of upsetting, because if you're the only person that the child gets their education from, then hopefully you would really value education, but it's not always true. It's seen as kind of a liberalizing influence, and so it's something you have to be careful of. And so, like, science curriculum was really regulated, and we made it halfway through a biology textbook in high school, but it's the Bob Jones University textbook.
Oh, no.
And I don't know if you're...
Yeah, I'm familiar with Bob Jones University. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not something that I would, like, at this point, having had a couple of college classes on, biology and physical science and stuff like that, it's like, ooh, that was not a good book. But that was probably, like, going to college. That was learning math and science are probably the hardest things to catch up on.
So, I mean, you're on the radio with me, and you're not a fan of the way that you were instructed in a strictly religious homeschool environment, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So where did this change of perspective come in your own life?
I think it came from a couple different things that kind of happened all at the same time. One,
Jinger is not one of the ATI or other homeschool-affiliated children who were severely abused under a homeschool system her parents and IBLP actively participated in lobbying for. A system which still actively allows children to be neglected and abused in the name of parents' rights. Jinger has never had to get a formal job.
This day, I feel like I have the professional and sometimes social skills of a 21-year-old, and I'm 29. Like, I constantly feel at least 7 to 10 years behind, and that's really, really hard.
And in fact, she admits that she is still too scared to fathom full autonomy over her life. So in what life does this book speak to the women who have had godless autonomy and sense of self? They looked it full in the face and were able to stop being scared. Why should they look to Jinger for answers when from their perspective she doesn't even look like someone who has really reached a fully actualized self? The idea that you could go through the deconstruction experience and then still decide to choose religion seems lost on Jinger as an option. That you could find your own sense of self through the experience and be happy seems lost on Jinger as an option. Instead, everyone who deconstructs instead of disentangles is fake happy with their fake quote-unquote unfettered freedom. We've already discussed one of the expectations that I would find quote-unquote freedom and the good life by rejecting all rules, commitments, family ties, and religious convictions, much like Joshua Harris and others in the deconstruction movement. And yet this book is dedicated to those who have been hurt by the teachings of Bill Gothard or any religious leader who claimed to speak for God but didn't. What an interesting disconnect from reality. What does rejecting all rules mean, Jinger? What does rejecting all commitments mean, Jinger? What commitments are these? Why do you think people who deconstruct are rejecting their family ties rather than being rejected by their families? Why do you think that them having to cut off family to be healthier versions of themselves doesn't hurt? I mean, how pathetic at Jinger's big age, at the supposed end of her disentanglement journey, she still apparently thinks people who aren't Christians don't have morals or experience normal feelings of love. But along my journey of disentanglement, I've come to see that unfettered freedom does not produce the good life. Why? Because it puts me in charge of my life, and I am not the best judge of what is best for me. I mean, clearly, since you wrote this section and thought it made sense. Freedom, the good life. These phrases are repeated throughout this book, and at no point does Jinger or her ghostwriter decide to define what these mean. In describing Gothard's sixth principle, the principle of freedom, it seems as though Jinger still keeps his definition of freedom. Quote, for the sixth principle, freedom, Gothard had a clever description. Enjoying the desire and the power to do what is right rather than claiming the privilege to do what I want. Of the 7 basic principles, she explains how she disentangled 5, while freedom was among the 2 that she did not detail disentangling. Maybe this is what she, uses the next chapter for. In the chapter, Freedom from Fear, particularly pages 128 through 130, Jinger explains the only true freedom is found in Christianity. It is found through Christ. It is basically a hard sell for John MacArthur and Calvinism. The Grace Church PR ghostwriter really jumped out in this section. We revisit this idea that because Jinger doesn't think that she can have a moral compass outside of Christianity, no one can. Contrary to what I grew up believing, the ultimate threat to you and me is not the world. Instead, the ultimate threat to me is me. I need freedom not from the influence of the world, not even from a religious system, but from myself. I am born enslaved by my own sin. We are already messed up and infected by sin. The world can't make us more sinful than we already are. The freedom we need is not from the world, it is from ourselves. My prayer is that people will stop focusing on their own efforts and look toward the true freedom, rest, and refuge that only Jesus Christ provides. And now, I get it. I identify as Christian, so I don't want to completely disparage what Jinger and her church PR are trying to say, which I think she's trying to convey that the love Jesus has for us is so great, so deep, that it's liberating. God is love, and is this enduring, never-ending source of love and therefore freedom and liberation. I agree. I just don't agree with Jinger that people who do not cite Jesus as the well of their love don't experience this feeling. I think part of being free from the fear includes accepting that it is totally 100% possible that you could be wrong about this, and therefore have no right to be emphatic that others are doing it wrong. Isn't that the point of this book? That you were wrong about Gothard and wrong about God as a result? I mean, you can eat pork and a moderate amount of alcohol can be drunk, but homosexuality is still wrong? I guess when you disentangle instead of deconstruct. I really have this fear, pun superintended, and I feel like I've said this before, that we're all going to get to heaven and God is going to be like, oh, I can forgive all the other stuff, babe. But I felt like shrimp was the least you could do. You could have, that was the least you could do is not eat shrimp. Anyway, on pages 189 through 190, Jinger makes this analogy regarding deconstruction. As I reflect on my journey over the past decade, part of me is amazed that I am holding tightly to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Many of my peers who grew up under Gothard's teaching or another strict religious system want nothing to do with Christianity. For years, they invested all their hopes in made-man rules. Despite all that, they still discovered, as I did, that those rules could never restrain their sinful hearts. When they didn't experience the blessed life Gothard promised, when they struggled with purity, anxiety, and doubt, they questioned the rules. They saw the hypocrisy. They were close with people who said they loved Jesus, but then behaved as if they didn't know him. This tore their faith down to the studs, and they never built it back up with the truth. Instead, they abandoned all religion. There's a sense in which this is the easy route. It's less work to abandon the house once you've torn it down, rather than lay another foundation and build it again brick by brick. I can imagine a world where I had abandoned Christianity entirely and instead built a new life from my desires. But that didn't happen because Jesus saved me. His love compelled me to keep trusting him. I wish my friends knew that same love. And it is to me probably the most annoying thing she wrote in this book. Of course, Little Miss starts something and can't finish it, never written a book without a ghostwriter, would say something like this. Ginger didn't deconstruct, so how would she know it's easier? For someone with 25 brothers that flip houses, you would think she would see how this is a piss poor analogy. Because this analogy assumes the bones of the house are still good after everything was torn down. It assumes that the house is worth being built up again. There is apparently no trauma in Ginger's house, so how could she understand how irreparably damaged someone else's house is? Some people had a hoarded house, Ginger, and when all the stuff was cleared out, it was still uninhabitable. Not everyone had television shows, brand deals, and book deals to sink into money pits. And Ginger's answer for this might be, well, this is my story of disentanglement. And to that I must say, so then why dedicate your book to women you self-righteously pity? Why keep bringing them up? Especially in any context that is not simply, we were in a cult and I am happy that we got over the fear that kept us in it. That is probably my biggest issue with this whole disentangle versus deconstruct thing. There is no deep reflection on Ginger's end that I was in a cult, we got out of a cult. Rather than telling others who also left they are healing incorrectly, she should be speaking with them about their shared experiences. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like Ginger is a heroin addict who uses methadone to stop using heroin, and rather than attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings, she's standing outside the building telling everyone the only way to really get clean is by using methadone. I don't know, I just feel like this disentangle versus deconstruction nonsense is just Ginger being afraid of working the steps. I just really feel some type of way about a girl who says she's too scared to have full autonomy over her life, that she's not a good judge of her own life, pitying those who aren't, pitying those who are doing or did the actual work. My final critique of this book is going to semi-focus on the promotions run. First of all, I hate the use of cult-like and cult in the promotions, and yet never in this book is cult mentioned or addressed. I don't understand why this kind of manipulative and misleading marketing is not considered lying to Christians. But I guess when he is a compassionate and forgiving God instead of the mean, vengeful one. Ginger is also extremely careful in each media promotion she did to say cult-like. It begs the question of how much she bothered in the last decade of disentangling to examine the possibility that she did grow up, if not in a cult, a very high control religious group, which again circles back to my question of why she thinks this is a book that will resonate with people who left Christianity after leaving Bill Gothard's teachings. That you're still avoiding engaging that sort of thing, but have supposedly removed the fear aspect of your faith. IDK kind of smells like bitch in here. I have to give credit where credit is due, unfortunately, and point out that in the interview that Ginger gave with Kristen on the Girl Defined podcast, Kristen was the only person who directly asked Ginger to define what she meant by cult-like what that meant. It was so funny because Kristen asks her, and then Ginger gives this convoluted, pre-planned talking point that she's given to all of the other promotional interviews that doesn't answer the question that Kristen asked. And Kristen was like, okay, no, but what does cult-like mean?
Was looking through some of the comments on your social media that someone had commented regarding your book. This one girl said, she's like, I've been watching the Duggars for years. I love their show, but what is she talking about? Like cult-like religion or breaking free? Like she was so confused, like what is going on? And although I feel like I can relate to a lot of what you've shared in your book, I think some people listening right now might feel like, what is she breaking free from? What a cult, like what is she talking about? So can you just give us a quick nutshell on what that means?
Yes. So my story that I wanted to tell in this book, Becoming Free Indeed, it's really the story of my faith journey, because I did grow up under some harmful theology that it threatened to leave me fearful and confused about who Jesus is. And so this is the story of how I've had to, what I'd say, disentangle truth from error on my way to finding freedom in Jesus. Mm-hmm. And this story has been something that I've really wanted to share because, like you said, you were your family kind of dabbled a little bit, like, okay, I'm going to take some pieces from it. But for those who were totally engrossed in the teachings, it was really sad to see a lot of the kids just leaving Christianity entirely because it was just so confusing. They were so confused about what is true and what is not true. And so that's what really gave me a desire to write this book.
Mm-hmm. When you mention a cult-like religion, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think that these teachings, I can't say, okay, it is a cult, because I think the experts would have to say that. But when I look at it, it has certain dimensions of that, because I think when you follow and focus on, like you said, one leader, it becomes this focus on this one person thinking he has these answers that he's giving to us from God and multiple.
And this answer is so laughable. And again, why it feels so dishonest and disingenuous of her to be using cult and cult-like in her promotions. There were and are plenty of cult experts who would have been willing to discuss IBLP and high religious control groups for the purpose of her book. Especially Jinger is a very high-profile person in the Christian fundamentalist movement. Acting like this wasn't an option for her is a choice, and probably would have felt too close to criticizing her family since her parents in particular are still all up in it. She uses the example of the Jonestown Massacre in the book. She uses the example of the Jonestown Massacre to explain like extreme deference to authority, and I think it's a misplaced example, as though it's out of the realm of possibility. I mean, while yes, they never experienced something so extreme, Jinger acts that within a group that emphasizes this extreme deference to authority and children's absolute obedience, please see, if I say it, you obey it, and the obedience game, like that this was so outside of the realm of possibility, and that's kind of weird. Throughout the book, there are so many examples of the various facets of Dr. Hassan's bite model, and yet it is never referred to, it is never engaged with, it is never discussed. Like, what better way to quote-unquote remove faith from error than by pointing out these errors with very specific language? It almost feels like for Jinger, doing this would require her to examine some of the ways these things still linger in her life.
I literally know Jesus turned me from darkness to light, and my life was changed and transformed. And I am so grateful for the freedom in Christ and the salvation that he's given.
Because in all reality, Jinger went from one male church leader to another. There was no journey in which she examined different ways the Bible is taught and interpreted. And that is to say, like various, multiple different ways, right? Her husband's version of Christianity fit into her worldview, and that was enough. Piggybacking off of her putty out of the hair analogy, I would say that it's like Jinger had a perm, decided to go natural, and rather than doing the big chop and trying out different natural hairstyles, she grew out the perm and immediately got a texturizer. And that analogy might go over your head if you aren't like black, but like
I did tell the story so many times because it just kind of gives a good picture. But like if you get putty stuck in your hair, you can just shave your head. You can just take all of your hair off and say, I'm done. I'm not going to work through this to take it out of my hair. But there's also another way that you can go. You can take the time to pick out the putty, even though it's painful, it's hard. It will take a very long time. And it's a slow process. So that's something that I feel like I've been on this journey with the Lord and with an open Bible, just going and saying, okay, I was so confused about who God was.
The thing about not cutting the hair, but instead of carefully removing the putty in the hair, is that like hair grows. So go ahead and cut it. Go ahead and shave it all off. It might be slow to grow. It might look awkward. It might be frustrating. It might grow out completely different, but it will grow out. In my opinion, her avoidance of deconstruction is a bite model example of changing the definitions of things. Because while I understand that for Jinger, deconstruction has the connotation that you leave Christianity, that does not make that a part of the actual definition.
Turn to deconstruction as the answer and have thought, okay, if I just tear apart my faith, all the way, tear it down to the studs, I'm never to rebuild it again, that is the answer, because a lot of people have been harmed by either someone who claimed to speak for God but didn't, or a certain religious system. And so they're reacting to that and thinking this is the only answer. Just tear apart your faith.
It's all bad.
Don't
we throw
ever
it all out.
figure it out. It's all bad. And I think, like you said, so many people have used that word in a way where they're like, okay, well, they're not doing that, but they've still used the deconstruction word. But disentangling may be a better option, because it's when you're separating truth from error. It takes time. It's like if you have putty stuck in your hair, you're going to take the time to like pick out the putty instead of just shave your head. And it takes so long. It's so painful. It's hard. It's a slow process. And that's exactly what I've been walking through the past 6 years now. And it's so worth it. And I think it's so sad to see how many have just totally rejected Christianity altogether because they've been hurt within the system.
Out about this process in the book is that you have become more biblical and more committed to your Christian faith in a better considered and more intellectually sound way than you were raised with. This is a very different process from what many people mean by deconstruction, where they just ask question after question after question.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, they don't really dig for the answers of those questions. I like the way that Hans Feeney kind of satirizes this, his Lutheran Satire YouTube channel. It's Tyler, the ex-evangelical swimming instructor, where he's like, I quit swimming because it couldn't give me what I wanted. It turns out he'd never gone to the deep end of the pool. He was just standing at his ankles in the shallow end. And that's how a lot of these deconversion stories happen.
Yeah.
But you dug deeper. You refused to be shallow about it. And with the guidance of, it sounds like, some wise people, and at least one that you were interested in for ulterior motives, that you sought answers and you found them.
Yeah, I just heard somebody recently say, it's your perspective when you come to this. You're looking for answers instead of exits. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what my journey has been. Because of this, it's interesting. So many kids that were in that setting is so hard, and they just, like, if their hearts weren't already changed by the gospel, then it's like you can try to keep up so many outward things, and eventually that's all going to break down. It's interesting though, because a lot of these kids, I think that they would lean to this deconstruction and say, okay, this is my exit. This is the way that I'm going to get out. But for me, once I was saved at the age of 14, all I wanted to do was to know God better. And yes, it's been a challenge to like work through these teachings. It's been hard and painful because it's confusing. Like when you've been taught something about who God is and his character and nature, and there's the sweetness of a relationship with God is something that you won't find anywhere else. And so for anyone who's seeking to go down that road of deconstruction, I would just say people will let you down inside the church, sadly, and that can take years to heal from, or a lifetime. But people will also let you down outside of the church. And Jesus is the only one who will never let you down. He'll never leave you or forsake you as his child.
Deconstruction for some leads to leaving the faith, and to others, it is strengthened in new ways. The smug way Jinger uses the book and her choices of media promotion to reassert her conservative Christianity ultimately doesn't feel like an attractive invitation to Christ for those who have left.
Roles and things like that. And so often in the deconstruction movement, you have people who might have grown up in a legalistic context. And then when they realize that some of that is wrong, they tend to kind of tangle it all up together and throw the whole thing away, or maybe reinvent a faith that's really more palatable to them, or something that feels safer to them. And that's understandable. I think we can all understand the knee-jerk reaction to want to do that, to want to find teachings that feel safer to you, that feel, non-toxic to you. But in your book, you talk so specifically about the years-long journey you went on to disentangle the false teachings from the real gospel. And I was so excited when I saw that word, because so many people tend to just jump to that word deconstruction. And I wanted to ask you specifically, like, why did you reject the word deconstruction in favor of something like unthreading or disentangling? Because not a lot of people are making those distinctions. And I think you did a beautiful job with that.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to see. I think in the culture that we're in, there's so much focus on how much pain somebody went through, which is a lot of times this real pain. And I know I experienced that, the confusion that you experience whenever you're listening to a teacher who claims to speak for God but doesn't, or you're in a church setting that is difficult, and it's challenging to come out of that and to say, okay, well, God's word is true, even though that teacher may have implied some things that weren't based in the Bible, or maybe they were abusive in their words, or even sadly, so many who have experienced much more pain than I could have ever imagined within the context of church or somebody who was a minister. So I understand there's so much pain there and hurt, but sadly, this deconstruction movement has become a thing where if you've been harmed within Christianity at all, then a lot of people are just tearing their faith down to the studs, never to build it up again, saying, this is how I'm going to cope. This is how I'm going to get through, is by throwing it all away. And that's something that we've seen a rise in, really. And it's so sad. Whenever I was thinking through my story, I had that word. I remember the word deconstruction. I was like, that's definitely not it. That's not my journey. Because you see, like, Joshua Harris has this deconstructor starter pack that he's offering for people. And I was like, that is so sad. And it's so tragic that people are turning to that. And I think so many in the Christian world may use the word deconstruction because of, like, I don't have a good word for what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And they feel like you have to narrow it down to one word. So, the word disentangling is just something that makes sense. And
while dedicated to those people, the kind of audience that would enjoy this book and marvel at it are already practicing Christians. Like at the bottom of page 190 when Jinger says this, perhaps you're reading this book and you're not a Christian. Maybe you reject the strict conservative religious community that raised you, and you picked up this book hoping that I was going to tell you that I had turned my back on my faith. You were imagining a story of enlightenment. A religious girl raised to always wear skirts and never kiss boys became an atheist or agnostic and now believes the Bible is nothing more than a collection of fairy tales. Sorry to disappoint you. That is not my story. And it's like, girl, not a single person who picked up this book thought it was going to be you magically becoming an atheist or agnostic. In what life has your online persona given that vibe? Maybe this is a declaration for those people who don't follow Jinger and are just going to see the Jinger, Duggar, Vuolo on the book cover and just assume. And I have to make the comment on the Duggar last name being on the book cover, very pointedly added, despite not writing her last book with the Duggar last name included. And while yes, there are some comments like that, the overwhelming majority of people are praising Jinger for continuing to be Christian. Like, this is a book that is enjoyable to people, and in particular, Christian people who watched the show, enjoyed the show, and thought it was a bit extreme, and are happy that she gets to wear pants now. I don't think anyone is disappointed that Jinger is still a Christian, but rather disappointed with the type of Christianity she still pursues. Who cares that your church allows a glass of wine with dinner if it's encouraging extreme homophobia? Jinger chose to appear on the Girl Defined podcast. She closely associates herself with someone as hateful as Allie B. Stuckey. Is the Christian church shrinking just because of false teachers like Bill Gothard? Is there no blame to be placed on the narrow, smiling bigotry of the millennial moral majority? I was reading Hood Feminism recently, and in the intro, the author says that the book isn't going to be an easy read. And that line made me realize how much of an easy read Jinger's book is, and that there are no difficult or uncomfortable truths. And I think that matters in the context of who this book is supposedly written for. While the marketing is very side-eye, the promotions did provide interesting anecdotal material, things that we had never heard before regarding IBLP that is even more juicy to hear from the perspective of a member of one of its golden families. I am super, super excited for Shiny Happy People, and I hate that it will probably spur people to buy this basic ass cash grab ass book. All right, guys, that's all for me today. Thanks so much for your patience. I will share soon a bit more about why the video content has been so slow. To my girl Linda, I promise I am going to finish the Josh and Anna series. I have at least 2 simpler videos I want to put out first while I organize everything that has happened between the trial and now, but that is coming. So see you guys for the next one.
Let's go. It's like you niggas gotta stop acting weird. You niggas gotta stop acting weird.